Do these missile cities include missile factories as well?
Yes, they do. This was certainly something that's been part of the Iranian development process going back years.
I'm Borzu Deragahi. Welcome to my podcast and Substack newsletter. It's called Badlands. It's at borzu.substack.com, BORZOU. Please subscribe. I'm here today with Ali Ahmadi. Ali Ahmadi is a geopolitical strategist with a focus on economics. And I guess what I just want to ask, first of all, given what you know about Iran's industrial capacity, how long can Iran continue to fight? I've been talking to people in Tehran, and they're saying to me, at least 6 months. What do you think?
Well, thank you for having me. In terms of Iran's capacity to fight on, Iran has a very significant industrial base. It has built a very large industrial base for specifically the manufacturing of the military equipment it would need to keep fighting. It has thousands. It has, it's hard to know exactly how many because it's classified. The Western intelligence organizations kind of go back and forth on this, but it has probably north of 2,000 medium range missiles that it can hit Israel with. Its stockpile of short range missiles that it can hit the GCC countries with, and its stockpile of drones that can go as far as is the Shahed drone can reach Israel has already. That stockpile is practically infinite. I mean, there's thousands upon thousands of them. So the Iran can continue to fight this war for a while longer. And the thing with the thing with Iran is that it's there the interests of the two sides has to be properly understood. From an Iranian standpoint, the fear isn't the war ending. The fear isn't the war dragging on. The fear is the war ending and then starting back up again in 6 months when the US has kind of managed to get its wits about it and sort of think up a new military strategy or something like that. So Iran can't is not really in the position of just ending this war and saying, okay, we give up because it's not really going to stop unless it ends on the terms similar to what Iran has outlined in the talks.
Yeah, and we hear these stories about these, and we see the videos of these underground missile cities, these military sites built into Iran's many, 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 many mountains and caves and so on. And Iran has been touting these, to be fair, for like years. They've been showing videos of them, and a lot of people in think tanks in the US and elsewhere have dismissed these as like propaganda and so on. It turns out they weren't exactly propaganda. Do these, here's my key question, to the best of your knowledge and to the best of your understanding, do these missile cities include missile factories as well?
Yes, they do. So some of them at least do. This was certainly something that's been part of the Iranian development process going back years. But a lot of Iran's missile construction facilities were built above ground. It was during the after the 12-day war that Iranian generals said, "Okay, we need to move all of this production, the
Wow.
entire supply chain underground." And so it's hard to say exactly how much that is disrupted because obviously supply chains are complicated. Certainly some of it is above ground. And so it's hard to say like how many missiles Iran is producing now, but Iran's capacity to produce these missiles, the way Iran builds them is infinitely reproducible. I mean, this is something that comes up again and again, especially regarding the nuclear file specifically, but it's true in the case of the missiles as well. Iran was producing about 50 missiles a month of the more advanced
Ballistic
medium
missiles.
range
Yeah.
missiles. Yeah, of the ballistic
Solid
missiles.
fuel or do you know?
I think a combination of the two.
Solid and
Iran
liquid.
was building about 50 of them a month before the 12-day war.
Yeah.
And then Israel attacked a bunch of these missile facilities and the production facilities, and not as significantly perhaps as they're being attacked this time around. But by the time this war came around, according to Marco Rubio, Iran's production was up to 100 missiles a month. So, Iran is heavily motivated because it's such an important part of of Iran's deterrence, and they're built in a much more simple manner than say a lot of complicated American military equipment that they can, produce only like 60 to 100 of a year, like the THAAD rockets and so on.
And what about the drones? The same thing goes for those?
I think the drones are actually easier in terms of supply chain. I mean, you think about the Shahid drone. I mean, it's at this point, maybe it wasn't necessarily the case when the Shahid drone was debuted many years ago, but at this point, I think you can basically possibly build something similar to a Shahid drone with most of these capabilities with
Ali, it looks
off-the-shelf equipment. So I mean,
it looks
it's
like
yeah.
you can order the parts from Temu or Alibaba right now. It
Yeah,
looks
I
very
mean,
simple.
a lot of the, I mean, even the Taliban started building
Yeah.
drones. Not anything like Iran has, but maybe something somewhat similar to the Shahid 101, the very much older version. So a lot of this technology has proliferated to the point where it's available on like online markets, or at least a lot of its components are. And the Shahid is designed to be something extremely simple that can be mass produced at a very low cost. There's, traditionally it's said that each Shahid costs somewhere between 20 to $25,000. I've seen assessments being as low as $7,000. And so it's a fairly easy machine to put together. And it's really the what's innovative about the Shahid isn't necessarily that it's this like extremely over-engineered piece of technology. It's the doctrine involved. The assumption with everybody was that you need to build these extremely expensive pieces that you can only have a small number of. And Iran said, no, we need them to be expendable. We need to be able to deploy large numbers of them at the same time. And that's what's worked. It's worked better than the short range ballistic missiles in this war.
They've hit Iran's main steel factory and damaged it very badly, if not destroyed it. Um, what about raw materials? Does Iran have ways of getting those raw materials? Steel, the aluminum. I guess the parts for the drones are a lot easier.
Right. I mean, Iran's metals industry is a very important part of Iran's sort of industrial story. It has a major sort of it has a lot of cultural cachet among the Iranian people. Foulad Mubarakeh, the Mubarak Steel Company, is, in many ways similar to like U.S. Steel in terms of
Yeah.
how it's thought of in the popular consciousness. A lot of like middle class people, getting out of poverty, becoming middle class, working for these kinds of companies. And Iran exports a lot of metals. So I mean, the existing stockpile of metals that exist across the country are, still going to be still significant enough that I don't think it's really going to hinder military-related production right now. Could it possibly hinder Iran's, depending on how badly damaged these facilities are and how these are large, sprawling facilities. So, I mean, depending on what's been hit, what the damage assessment is, and I don't think we have a clear sense of that yet. It could definitely hamper Iran's economic situation after the war ends, but it's not really going to slow down, I think, missile
Okay.
and drone production. Not even that necessarily Iran needs new missile and drone production to continue the war for at least a few more months, considering the stockpile that's already exists.
And what about Russia and China? There is some word that China has been providing intelligence support, and that Russia has been using the reverse engineered Shaheds and helping the Iranians out with a few of those as well. Is there a supply chain, or could there be potentially a supply chain from those two Eurasian powers to Iran if this war extends for a while?
I mean, I think so. If I this is because of the nature of these kinds of transactions,
Sure.
it's impossible to have any real visibility into them, know exactly what's going on. I would say listening to like the public discourse, especially in the West, I understand why, especially a lot of Europeans and especially Zelensky feels the need to like point at Vladimir Putin because they're trying to bank favors with the United States still. But the thing is that if I was, if you want to get a real picture of the situation, I would recommend maybe de-emphasizing Russia to some extent and maybe on the Chinese side a little bit more,
Yeah.
because the Chinese are the ones that have a lot of capacity, especially in terms of their satellite capabilities, communications, ISR targeting. They have, they have more of it than they know what to do with. Literally, there's a glut in the Chinese satellite market.
Wow.
And they tend to be more reliable military partners for Iran as opposed to Russia, that's been maybe a longer term military partner. Iran has already worked with a lot of Russian technology, so there's always a temptation to go back because installing that new technology into your existing systems is easier for that reason. But there's a lot of reasons for Iran and Russia have never really had any kind of trust whatsoever.
Yeah.
I think with the Chinese, there's a little bit more professionalism in how they carry themselves. They're not going to give you everything you want, but if they tell you they're going to give you something, they're going to give it. With the Russians, you have a weird game. There's, Vladimir Putin's talking about how Israel is basically a Russian-speaking country. Half the oligarchs are, dual citizens in Israel. So it's a very complicated, messier political environment to deal with.
I guess China, it's a simple transaction. Our oil for your weapons and military support. It's a lot more simple in a way.
It's a lot more simple. Yeah, I think that just the cooperation with the Chinese in general is easier
Yeah.
than cooperation with the Russians. But yeah, I mean, there's also the issue of settlements because Iran sells so much of its oil to China, and a lot of this money is in the Chinese banking system, yuan
Yeah.
denominated, and is available for Iran to tap into for
Fine.
for various things.
And so let's shift over a little bit to the humanitarian side. What about the population, the civilian population? Is there, I mean, I've been speaking to people in Tehran. They say there's plenty of food. Prices haven't even gone up that much. And that one person said to me today, for the first time, you saw some extra long queues at petrol stations with people fueling up in anticipation of whatever Trump has in store for them. What are you hearing? And also, what do you think? How long could the Iranian population hold out before it buckles under the pressure of war-imposed deprivation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the domestic situation has been managed very well. I think the Iranian government was anticipating this. You have a lot of different things about Iran lend themselves in terms of Iran's, oil capacity and having a lot of stock. The only time you see people like lining up in queues or hearing about like petrol stations not having enough is when there's a sudden rush to them for some reason. So that becomes really more of a supply chain issue than an issue of whether there is enough food. Also, from what I've heard, is the supermarkets and supply chains in that respect are working just fine. Obviously, I'm not in Iran now, but I was in Iran during the 12-day war. That was not as extensive of a conflict, but even the like food delivery apps were functioning just
Yeah,
fine throughout the
that's what I'm
conflict.
hearing
So
now too. Yeah,
yeah, so there is a lot of resilience in Iran to that extent. State-owned corporations, a lot of private companies that want to endear the Iranian population themselves or have a sense of patriotism of their own are going to step up in these kinds of situations. So that has been going fairly well. I mean, I would say with the Iranian population, what they've shown over and over again is they will stick with the government if they feel like a war is being imposed on them.
yeah.
They will that arrangement will be undermined if they feel like the government is dragging on the war for no reason.
Oh,
And so the Iranian government has been in its messaging to the public been very rather explicit about what the situation is
yeah,
here. That the Trump administration wanted to essentially take Iran's capacity to defend itself away in the form of the missiles and Iran's non-state alliance network that have, especially the non-state alliance network that Iran has. I don't call them proxies. I know that's a sort of favorite terminology in the West. But these groups were very controversial inside Iran for
sure.
a long time. Much less so nowadays, right?
Hmm.
Especially if the Iran support for Syria was very controversial for the entire
Huge.
time it was going on for
Even
good
people in the
reason. I mean,
government were speaking out. Even people inside the
yeah,
regime were speaking
absolutely.
out
And
against.
I totally understand that, supporting a guy like Bashar Assad is extremely distasteful. And I probably wouldn't have done it if I was them. But now when Bashar Assad is gone, all of a sudden you see the air corridor that has opened up
Mm.
over Syria that is a very central part of the attack plans against Iran, both during the 12-day war and now. So I think the messaging from the Iranian government to the public has been pretty good, explaining that Iran's trying to maintain its capacity to defend itself. We don't want to, unfortunately, become a country like Lebanon or Syria that just gets pummeled despite these sort of ceasefire agreements on a regular basis. And in the context of these quote unquote negotiations, as Donald Trump likes to call them, that are going on now, what the United States is asking for is basically they want sort of a temporary 3 week 20-day ceasefire. And they want the Strait of Hormuz open to relieve the economic pain on them. And so it's like, I don't know what is supposed to be what Iran gets out of this at all, because the US needs some time to reposition forces or whatever it needs to do in that regard. There's a lot of airframe fatigue with their fighter jets, and so they need some time off. Their air defense assets they're getting depleted very
Sure.
quickly. figure something out there. Iran's not getting anything and is not under the impression that if we get back to the negotiating table that America started, during negotiations, the US started a war twice. The idea that we're actually going to get somewhere this time is just not viable. I think from the Iranian standpoint, they need to establish deterrence. And I think, especially from the standpoint of the military, deterrence is established with two elements. One is them running out of interceptors,
Yeah.
of air defense interceptors, which they're very well on their way of doing now. Israel and the GCC are practically out. They're very rarely even contesting Iranian missiles at this point, unless they're hitting very important targets or they know for a fact they can intercept them depending on what's being launched. And also very significant economic pain on the West. And that, the issue with the Strait of Hormuz was about that initially, about imposing a very strong level of economic pain. And at this point, I mean, that's how it started a month ago. And at this point, there are people in the Iranian parliament wondering, why didn't we do this 20 years ago? Why did we waste the last 20 years negotiating with these people? And it's never going to go anywhere. The idea of having the Strait of Hormuz and being able to make money off of establishing a toll booth on it actually makes way more sense than thinking we're going to get sanctions relief out of these people. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think everybody would prefer sanctions relief
Right.
being part of the global economy rather than setting up this toll booth and saying, pay me before you pass.
Yeah.
But at this point, like what's actually realistic? The toll booth is realistic as it gets.
Shifting to a little bit towards your specialty as a kind of analyst of uh, global economics and tariffs and trade and so on. Let me ask you, as I've asked other people, what will be the impact of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz on global supply chains, on the oil market, on the fertilizer market, on the spring planting season worldwide? Are we going to start seeing, mass deprivation and hunger around the world because of this? And could that have an impact on Iranian policy calculations?
I mean, I think those issues are different and from one another. They're not necessarily on the same track. So from the thing that you emphasize the most for good reason, the issue with fertilizers, right? A lot of the world's urea comes out of the Persian Gulf region, and because these are chemical products. And so not having this would be a huge problem. And you're already hearing stories of like planters in India because the price has gone up significantly, not being able to afford as much of it. And so they're going to have to use less, means a reduced yield. So there's going to be some problems in that regard. I think that the people that understand fertilizer markets specifically better than me seem to believe that this would be a problem, much more serious problem, if this situation went on for months after this point. That for now, global stocks are very high. They're somewhat historically high in many categories. And that if this situation is relieved at some point in the next few weeks or something like that, we're probably mostly fine. You might see some inflation, but the bigger problem is going to be the petroleum. The oil and natural gas is the business community in the United States warned Donald Trump more than 2 weeks ago, probably 3 weeks ago, that if you don't get the Strait of Hormuz open in the next 2 weeks, this isn't just going to be a disruption that's going to take some months to alleviate. This is going to reorganize the entire world's supply chains. And you have to think about what that means exactly. Is if the oil companies that are selling the oil and the gas companies that are selling the natural gas, if they can't deliver on their contracts, they will delay, right? They say, okay, we can't do it right now, we'll do it later. That goes on for a long enough period of time. They now will be in legal jeopardy unless they just cancel the contract altogether. So the oil companies and the gas companies cancel their contracts. Now the refiners, they don't have supply. They have to cancel their contracts. It's called force majeure. And so this goes over and over again. That goes to the chemical industry, goes to the plastics industry. Food packaging is entirely reliant on plastic. There is no alternative. So I hear some people saying, great, we're going to get rid of plastics and be a more environmentally friendly. Like, we don't really have alternatives for these things. Like, we need to find alternatives where we can go off of them for, like, especially long distance export of food. There's no alternative to plastic. So this is going to create a lot of this is going to have an inflationary effect in the global economy. You already see the price of a lot of airline tickets going up some 5,000%. This Asia is, of course, especially affected by this because there's still this kind of old British Empire separation of, the east of the Suez Canal. Countries are more reliant on Persian Gulf products. West of the Suez Canal, there's a bit more of a mix. There's the North Sea. There's other sources, and so this is Asia has been gripped by this. You have, Indonesia is having currency problems because they need to pay a lot more for energy. So this creates a balance of payment issue where they're running out of dollars and euros. They're running out of hard currency. Pakistan dealt with a very similar situation a couple of years ago because of exploding gas prices. It's going to be dealing with the same situation again unless, Iran gives it more slots in terms of the oil and gas that it's letting over to Pakistan. You have a lot of countries around Asia quietly, telling people to work from home, making universities, 3 days or 4 weeks, 4 days a week. And now it's spreading into Europe because all of those Asian countries are going to start competing with the Europeans for the supply that's available in the Western Hemisphere. So this is now shaping up to the point where it's hitting a lot of Europeans. Well, the thing you have to understand about oil shocks, they happen sequentially, not all at once.
It's going to hit Asia first, for example, and it's already
It's
hitting
already
Asia.
hit Asia, very.
Yeah. And then it will eventually reach the North America and Europe and so on. When will it reach North America, the oil shock?
Well, North America is an interesting
I mean, a
question because the
price
thing is that
shock, let's
America
say.
has a lot of, right, America has a lot of its own
Supply.
oil and natural gas. So one thing you've seen even now compared to even to like 2022 is gas prices are not going above a certain level. Like it's almost as if there's no problem, especially from a gas price point of view of I'm talking about natural gas because natural gas is not an international commodity like oil.
Sure.
You need to freeze it, liquefy it in order to sell it. And there's a limited capacity for doing that in North America. So a lot of that gas is just sort of stuck in North America, can't go to Europe, even if the Europeans are willing to pay 3 times as much for it. So in terms of gas, North America is going to be okay for now. Oil is different. The oil markets in the United States, they are allowed to export all over the world. Just because the oil is drilled in the United States doesn't mean it has to go to the United States. And so you're already seeing the West Texas intermediate gas go above even the Brent crude, which is what people
Right.
usually talk about when they're talking about oil prices. They're
The
talking about
standard.
Brent crude. I should also point out that Brent crude, this is something I think a lot of people are kind of missing right now, is that with Brent is a speculative number. It's basically commodities
Future.
traders speculating. Yeah, it's a 1 month futures contract typically. And so you're basically speculating on how much oil is going to cost next month. And that's a big part of why Brent has stayed down is because the commodity dealers are in this perpetual state of just assuming this has to be a short-term thing. Trump will kind of, sort of taco a little bit somehow, and we'll get back to regular order by next month. And so prices can go above a certain amount. But the actual, dated Brent, which is like the actual barrels of physical oil that are being bought and sold in like Oman, they're being sold over 150. Saudi Aramco is selling for 30 to 40 dollars above Brent. So like that would be again sort of 150 range. To
Wow.
say all around Asia, you have similar thing. A lot of the oil stocks that exist in like ports, the floating reserves that exist on the seas. A lot of the oil that came out of the Persian Gulf right before the war started only got delivered to their destination 2 weeks ago, right? It takes like 2 or 3 weeks to deliver destination. Those stocks are now being
Depleted.
drained down, and so the buffers have been removed, and so it's going to hit everybody a lot harder very quickly. And if we get back to regular order and this war is over and the Strait of Hormuz is everybody's just passing through by tomorrow, there's still going to be a lot of pain. There's going to take months and months and months for the global economy to work through a lot of these issues. And that's also going to serve as kind of a crisis amplifier for, the AI bubble and all of these different other private credits crisis going on in the United States. It's kind of gone under the radar because of the war. This is going to have the world is going to be struggling with this for the next 6 months at least, even if it ended today.
Do you think that Iran's leadership is concerned at all about a potential backlash? All these countries, for example, India, Sri Lanka, Philippines, Pakistan, extremely publicly, Turkey, as you've seen yourself, extremely publicly supportive of the Iranian stance. World opinion is so much with Iran that even people in the United States are maybe for the first time in my memory, like kind of siding, not wanting American troops to be killed or anything, but like kind of siding with Iran. Do you think that
Yep.
could change if their economic backlash extends?
I mean, if I'm not sure exactly where the Iranian government is on this, to be perfectly honest. If I was them, I would rest assured that Trump is going to be blamed. Because
Okay.
that at this point, I mean, Trump owns all of this policy and all of its consequences top to bottom. But you also have to make a differentiation between the public and the government. Because
Right.
at the end of the day, I mean, the Turkish government is, the Turkish people are by and large very supportive of the Iranian position on this. I've talked to Turkish people when the war started. I was in Istanbul. I've seen polling data out of
Yeah.
Turkey about this. Turkish government is has a lot of different things to balance. A lot of the jet fuel that Israeli fighter jets are using comes from Turkey, comes from Azerbaijan, Turkey through Azerbaijan. And this is true of a lot of different countries. Narendra Modi was in Israel 2 days before the war started.
Yeah.
And in communications that were very, very strange. And a lot of people in Iran seem to think that Narendra Modi was basically used as a human shield because a lot of the last minute preparations that the American Israelis had to make, like evacuating embassies, had to be done very openly and in public. So in order to make sure Iran doesn't fire a
Preemptive.
preventative strike, Narendra Modi being in Israel kind of helps. And this is kind of the problem with a lot of different countries. Either they have elites that are far more sympathetic, or at least mindful of Israeli and American interests because they're more powerful countries and the GCC and whatnot, or you have countries that where like India, they want to be friends with everybody, but they don't have enough by not taking a position that is more in line with international law and just what is right. They're not. Iran doesn't really feel in a position where it has to give them a lot of points. Now, I should say there is absolute. I can imagine a world in which Iran is obviously making a lot of different deals right now in terms of countries paying the toll. Iran is exempted. Iraq. Sri Lanka was exempted. You mentioned Sri Lanka because of the fact that they helped the Iranian sailors
Yeah.
that the U.S. attacked in the Dena ship. But
And
a lot
France,
of,
the extraordinary moment when the
right.
French ship was allowed out right after the French government vowed to veto any Security Council resolution that would authorize the use of force to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. That was a kind of extraordinary moment.
Right. And also there's been a sort of a detainee swap between Iran and France as well
Mm.
that I think broke maybe an hour or two ago. So there's been some movement on Japan also. They have negotiated something with Oman. Iran is trying to also negotiate with Oman to sort of formalize the process because obviously Oman is the country on the other side of the strait. And yeah, so this is these deals are being made, and I can certainly if the U.S. says, okay, you know what, we're leaving. We're just going to drop everything and go. What Iran would do in that situation isn't just keep the strait closed or semi-closed. They would say, all right, everybody, unless you're American or Israeli, everybody else, go ahead, but you need to pay us.
Yeah.
You need to pay the toll.
It's not a
And so
bad deal.
listen, from an economic standpoint, it's really not a bad deal
Yeah.
for businesses thinking of it specifically in economic terms, because
A
Iran
dollar a
can say
barrel tax, you know.
$1 a barrel for oil or $2
Yeah.
million per ship. These ships, like the oil tankers, carry something like 70, 90, probably right now over $100 million. If they can get back to regular order, this is not really a bad deal for them at all. Right now, the price of oil, based on like analysis done by Bloomberg, the price of oil, about a third of it is just geoeconomic uncertainty.
Right.
So if Iran did this and the geoeconomic uncertainty went down 2 months ago in December, it was just a couple of
65
bucks on
bucks.
top of
Yeah.
the price of
Yeah.
now it's 30 something dollars, well, 36, $37 per barrel. If this was alleviated, the extent to which the price of oil would come back down would make $1 per barrel, I mean, nothing. It's Iran reestablishing regular order after America busted it. And so, from an economic standpoint, I'm sure the companies will be more than happy to pay that. Of course, that would also essentially be a marker for the end of the U.S. empire, because commanding the waves is a big part of what the British Empire was about, and freedom of quote unquote freedom of navigation, meaning a de facto American control over the global commons. Is a big part of the American empire as well, and that would be put into significant jeopardy by Iran being able to do this.
Ali, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure.
I really appreciate being on. Thank you very much.
This has been the Badlands podcast. Please subscribe to my newsletter at borzoo.substack.com. Thanks for listening or watching.